Good evening, Larry. Good
Hey,
afternoon. How are
hey
you?
there. Had to dig you out of spam. Usually, in the future, it's better just, as you over WhatsApp, just send that.
Yeah, I think it sometimes doesn't always go through on my WhatsApp. The links
Oh,
they
okay.
don't always work, but we're here
Yeah.
now, and we'll figure it out in the next
So,
for the next episode. But
sorry for the delay.
no, it's great to see you. I recognize this shirt. I think that this is a shirt that you've worn before on the program. But yeah, I mean, where we were talking yesterday. There've been the developments. The Iranians seem to be providing a new set of proposals to the American camp about what they would like to focus on. And then we had a little bit of a breakdown of the assassination attempt, or what has been called an assassination attempt by some.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in the 24 hours since, what have you been noticing in the sort of Iranian space?
Well, on the Iranian space, it is Iran has toughened its demands. They've not eased at all. Made it clear to the United States that um, the first thing that has to be dealt with is lift the blockade. Now, the Trump administration labors under the false belief that if they just keep it blocked, they prevent any Iranian oil from leaving Karg Island, which they can't do. I mean, the U.S. doesn't have enough ships to prevent that. That Iran's economy will collapse and Iran will be forced to seek peace. That's not going to happen. They've selected an analytical conclusion that is just completely bogus. One of the things, one of the ways that Iran can deal with this, if you will, flood the zone with ships coming out, because if the United States stops a ship, an Iranian ship, they have to put a U.S. naval vessel with that ship in order to maintain control of it. The United States doesn't have enough ships to, if the Iranians flood 30, 40 ships out there, the United States doesn't have enough ships to do that. They literally are outnumbered. So Trump issued a truth earlier today.
I'll never get used to saying that.
Yeah, I'd like to call it a tweet. I like tweets so much better. But here is what President Trump said. He goes, Iran has just informed us that they are in a state of collapse. They want us to open the Hormuz Strait as soon as possible as they try to figure out their leadership situation, which I believe they will be able to do. Thank you for your attention to this matter. What a bizarre note. Number one, Iran's not in a state of collapse at all. In fact, if anything, the Iranian leadership is the strongest it's ever been in its 46-year history. And for one reason. Let's take President Pezeshkian, the oldest one, at 71. The Ayatollah Mujtaba Khamenei, the youngest one, at 56. And then let's add in Arachi, Galibaf, the Speaker of the Parliament. So Arachi, the Foreign Minister, Galibaf, the Speaker of the Parliament, and then the head of the IRGC. What do those five men all share in common? They fought in combat together in the Iraq War, 1980 to 1988. Mujtaba, and they all were part of the IRGC. These are comrades. These are brothers in arms. They're not divided, just the opposite. They're all singing from the same sheet of music. It's the United States that's divided. It's the United States that doesn't have one combat veteran in the lot. And you don't underestimate the power of the bonds that are formed in war. Every one of those men, Pezeshkian, he wasn't part of the IRGC. He was regular army, except he was a medic. And as a medic, he was attached to the IRGC. And you ask any combat veteran what they think about medics. They venerate those guys because they kept them alive. and maybe even saved their lives at times when they were wounded. So this is this silliness that's being fed to Trump, and I suspect it's by the Israelis, that there is the state of collapse. Nonsense, absolute nonsense. So why is Trump saying this? So there are two possibilities. One, he genuinely believes it, and in believing that, recognizes that, falsely believes that the United States is in a very strong position to pursue the war. Alternative explanation is he's using that as an excuse to lift the blockade, which is what Iran is demanding. First step, lift the blockade. Second step, we're going to sit down and talk about how the Strait of Hormuz will operate going forward, because it's not international water, it's territorial water. Oman, halfway out, that's Oman's territorial water. Halfway out is Iran's territorial water. None of that there is international water, and despite the claims to the contrary. So Iran's going to continue to hold and operate that. The issue is to discuss with the United States how that will be going forward as a condition for ending the war. So Iran has toughened its demands, and in meeting with Russia, first it met with Pakistan to deliver its new demands to the United States. Then Arachi went to Oman, Muscat, to finish coordinating with the Omanis how they're going to divide up that Strait of Hormuz. Then he went back to Pakistan to get the message, how the U.S. replied. And then he went to Russia in St. Petersburg to meet with Vladimir Putin, not just with Lavrov, but with Putin himself, to inform them of what the state of the negotiations are. And Putin, in response to that, said basically, "We got your back."
Yeah, so there's been a lot of shuttle diplomacy with Iraqi, Pakistan, Russia, Oman, and continuing to do that. And I think we ended on that point, or that was one of the last things we mentioned, which to me at least, having worked in the industry for the period that I have, if you're making the effort to go between places in such a concerted effort, that shows that shows proaction or proactivity. That shows a desire to want to shape the framing, influence who thinks what and how they're thinking about it, versus the US, which, to your point, just looks dysfunctional. The US government is, I was reading one interesting article which kind of did point out, like, where is Rubio? He's been pretty absent for a while.
Yeah.
He's obviously still around, but relative to where he was in the earlier phases of the conflict, he's quite muted suddenly, and it's a bit strange as to why. Is he getting focused now on Cuba, or something? Is that Trump's next focus? But I wanted to ask you your opinion a little bit about some of the developments today. Now, I appreciate if you're not a pure finance guy, but Qatar, the Gulf states more broadly, UAE has left OPEC. That's because of some bad relationships with the Saudis. But is this also because they're just seeing the shit show that the Americans, the Trump administration more specifically, has created, and therefore they need to diversify?
So how much oil is the UAE pumping right now and delivering?
Qatar's pumping none. UAE's like none as well, isn't it? It's very low.
Right. So, it's going to pull out of OPEC. Okay. So what? It's not pumping anything right now anyway.
But doesn't it show a degradation of the institutions that have dominated our world since the Second World War?
Right now, it's a meaningless institution, because as long as the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and whatever limited amount of oil that Saudi Arabia is able to pump, nothing's coming out of Qatar, nothing's coming out of the UAE, nothing's coming out of Bahrain, nothing's coming out of Kuwait. What comes out of Iraq is allowed by, and they're working in tandem with Iran. So when I saw that, and everyone's, boy, this is big. No, it's not. It's right now. It's meaningless. Now, if the world was functioning and all the oil being pumped and coming out, and at that point the UAE says, "No, we're out. We're going our own way." Okay, that would be significant. But right now, it's meaningless. It's insignificant. In fact, it's a real question whether there will be a UAE if this thing goes on much longer.
Well, I mean, I think I think it's difficult to imagine it being what the Iranians would destroy it. Like, well, how would a UAE not exist in this case?
Well, where's this? Look at where its financial base is. Oil closed off, shut down. Real estate, selling high-priced condos to a bunch of foreigners that wanted to come in and find a Middle Eastern playground. That's dried up. The trade, international trade at Jebel Ali, which is the second largest, if not largest, free trade zone in the world, that's shut down. Finance, all the financial activity that used to flow through there, that's shut down. It's not going to survive if this keeps up much longer. It doesn't. That's why it's having to turn to ask the United States for a line of credit, basically. Bail us out. Wait a second. I thought you guys were billionaires, multi-billionaires. Nope. The cash flow has dried up. That's the problem.
Yeah, I think what's interesting to know for me is what this does do to the broader petrodollar, because clearly the Gulf states are going to be reevaluating their relationship with the United States. I mean, they're not exactly happy with what the Islamic Republic have done either, but
right.
I think in a much grand strategic sense, like longer term, they're going to be reconsidering their options. Not purely, but I think this is going to increase their diversification or de-risking away from just the US, right?
They've been
absolutely deepening ties with China and Russia and other players to an extent. So do you think, like, how do you think that could play out?
Yeah, no, it's think of it like you're paying the mafia for protection money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I give up 10% of my income a month to you so that you keep my store from getting burned down. And all of a sudden, the new kid on the block's burning your store down, and the mafia is not able to stop them. What's your incentive to keep paying the protection money? Because they can't protect you. That's what's going on right now. Qatar and Oman recognize what the score is. They're cutting deal. They'll cut the deal with Iran in a heartbeat. Bahrain used to be part of Iran anyway, so I expect Bahrain will be absorbed into Iran. That leaves the Saudis and Kuwaitis. The Kuwaitis, I think, from Iran's standpoint, they might as well go back and be part of Iraq. Iran will raise no objections over that. Kuwaitis might, but again, they don't. The United States is not going to go to war this time against Iraq over Kuwait, like we did back in 1990. And again, that whole thing, with benefit of hindsight, my God, that was a scam. Remember, the United States had been sharing not only intelligence with Iraq for 9 years, from 1980 through 1988. We'd been providing them with funding. We'd been providing them with the precursors. They were buying the precursor chemicals that were used to make chemical weapons, which we later claimed were a big threat. We also provided biological agents for biological warfare. That's another thing most Americans don't know. And then, so here's Saddam thinking that he had this special relationship with the United States. And then when Kuwait is basically, he says it's stealing their oil, and he asks the United States, hey, I'm going to take care of this if you're not going to take care of it. And April Glaspie said, we got no position on it. So he invades, and then all of a sudden he becomes enemy number one. By God, we got to stop it. And little did he realize that the Kuwaitis had been pumping money into George H.W. Bush family.
Well, I mean, I remember reading a bit about that history, and when the the Iranian Revolution happened in 1979, Khomeini over time became very paranoid, but rightfully so, that there was funding towards Saddam Hussein to support, and it became very clear that there was. I mean, initially it was like, no way would the Americans or Israelis as well be helping someone like Saddam Hussein, but they were so anti. Also, I mean, in the American case, it just seemed like they were bitter because they'd lost the Shah. So they funded Saddam Hussein's military operations or whatever machine, I mean, it was the most absurd sort of set of spiders webs of support, like networks, like in the 80s, wasn't it?
Yeah. Not only that, we provided intelligence, and when I'm saying provided intelligence, we told them the locations of Iranian troops, the plans that we had intercepted about what kind of offensive operations the Iranians were going to conduct. We talked about their lines of supply, where you could hurt them and prevent them from being able to operate. Initially, that was hand carried to the Iraqi general staff by the CIA. But then comes 1986, something called Iran-Contra. And all of a sudden, Saddam Hussein learns that the CIA that he is allowing into his country, that's bringing him all this intel, is also double dealing and sending weapons to the Iranians, which the Iranians are using against Iraqi forces. So Saddam gets pissed off, kicks the CIA out of the country, and he says he'll only deal with American military officers. And one of those the officer who led that and handled that for the next 2 years, from 87 through 88, was a dear friend of mine. God, we met, we started, I knew him for over 26 years before he died. Walter Patrick Lang was the colonel who hand carried that intelligence to Iraq and helped Iraq plan its final offensive against Iran. So, like I said, the history of this, the United States was deeply embedded with Iraq. And then when we went after Saddam for invading Kuwait, Saddam felt legitimately betrayed. Legitimately. By God, we had a 9-year relationship, and now all of a sudden, but it was covert. So most Americans didn't know about it. And so then in the aftermath of that, where he tried to assassinate George H.W. Bush in 1993, that's why he felt, you betray me, I'm going to get you.
But if I can just interject sort of on a personal question, though, if you don't mind me asking, but where were you at this point? Were you working in those?
Yeah. I was.
You were in the CIA at that point?
No, I was at State Department then in 1990. Yeah. Well, in fact, I met. I was part of working with the Consular Affairs. I was in the career counterterrorism unit, but with the first group of American women that came back from Kuwait that were allowed to leave. It was. I went up to the airport and met them in Baltimore, and again, I had no knowledge at that time of that the United States through the CIA had been providing all this support to Saddam. This was actually ironically the 3 days before Saddam invaded the Kuwait, we were involved with the counterterrorism operation in Trinidad and Tobago. A group of Libyan-backed locals had taken over the parliament. They'd killed the prime minister, and they were holding a number of people hostage. So we deployed what was called the Emergency Support Team, interagency team. It was actually led by Ambassador Joe Sullivan, but it had a JSOC element for JSOC operators. It had FBI negotiators. It had a State Department, what was called CIA incident response team. And then it was led by the State Department, Ambassador Sullivan, as well as a couple of communicators. And so actually, there was no need for a military solution. Ambassador Sullivan was able to negotiate an end, and it was ended peacefully. Hostages were released. But because this aircraft that we flew down there, this was covert action. And so we were trying to figure out, how are we going to get that plane out of there without drawing attention to it? And the morning that we were going to fly it out was the day that Saddam invaded Kuwait. And we thought, great. All the world's attention focused on that invasion. We flew out. We didn't have to worry about it. But from that point on, we set up an operations, my office, the counterterrorism office, set up in the State Department Operations Center. We had a specific section devoted to, U.S. hostages and other operations during that war. So, yeah, I was up to my elbows in it during that period. But at no point did anybody sit me down and tell me, hey, let me tell you the history of this. Let me tell you about why Saddam, feels betrayed and outraged by this. Legitimately so. Yeah, I was completely unaware of the prior history. We made Saddam into the ultimate bad guy. Yeah, no, I'm not saying Saddam was, he wasn't a
Not
Mahatma
exactly
Gandhi. Yeah, was he corrupt? Yes. Well, good God, join the long line of corrupt people over there in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, etc. Uh, did did he abuse the Shia? Yes, he did. But he had actually trusted us, and he's just another one that learned, man, don't trust the United States. They'll screw you if they get the opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, during the 90s, when you had the series of sanctions and the inspections and the strong efforts to really undermine his governance and the country as a whole. I mean, it's what led to 2003, really, isn't it?
Yeah. We're looking for those weapons of mass destruction. Yeah, where did he get those? Get them from us. We gave him the material to make them, for God's sake. Nobody told me that in 2003. I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, it's not an easy thing, I think, for a lot of people to admit, especially neocons. But it's reality, isn't it? What happened in the 80s and the 90s was very much a preceding factor to Afghanistan and Iraq. But just, to bring it more modern age then a little bit, Larry. So when you look at the historical shifts that you've just reference, right, and you talk about them, what parallels can you see to now? What sort of examples, overlaps can you see to how the balance of power is shifting in the region? I mean, we're a long way from a ceasefire. This thing isn't over. All interest is sort of ended. It's quite interesting. I've noted on some of the major news networks that I just monitor for reference, like they've stopped their 24-hour rolling coverage, their live updates, right? It's just ended because no more attention. So what parallels do you draw, in your opinion, based on what you've talked about and what we're seeing now?
Have you ever heard the story about, the baby elephant? From the time it's born, it's shackled with a heavy chain, and then as it grows up, it still has that chain, so it learns that it can't break free. And then it comes to associate that not so much it's the chain; it doesn't identify the steel, just anything tied around that leg prevents it from getting away. So later, when it's an adult, you can just tie a rope around its leg, and it'll think it can't get away, whereas it can easily break it. And then comes the day when they discover, hey, I can break free. That's Iran. Iran for 46 years was shackled under this situation where the United States was so dominant militarily that Iran didn't have any options. Iran spent 9 years being attacked by a proxy of the United States. Iraq was a proxy. And people want to argue and pretend that that's not the case, but it was a proxy. What's really interesting is during that entire war with Iraq, that was the most active time for Hezbollah, if you will, as a proxy for Iran, fighting against the United States, carrying out terrorist attacks against the Marines, the U.S. Embassy, kidnapping the chief of station for the CIA, kidnapping Rich Higgins, a Marine detailed to the UN. But once that war ended, Hezbollah didn't carry out any other attacks against U.S. targets in the 1990s. That's what's interesting. As well as why? Because Hezbollah, as it evolved, it would attack military targets. It attacked mostly military targets in Israel. That was its focus. So what we've seen now is that Iran has awakened to the fact that it can fight back against the United States and win. It was, the sort of the wake up call first came in 2003 when Saddam Hussein was invaded. Now, from the Iraqi standpoint, they were like cheering us on, because what did we, the United States, do? We came in and we took the Shia Muslims who had been oppressed by the Ba'athist Party, by Saddam Hussein for 30 years, and we put them in charge. Well, many of them had been had refuge and safe haven in Tehran. So now you've got this natural connection between the Shia who are now ruling Iraq and the Shia in Iran. So they're looking and say, huh. But they also watched what the United States had done to Saddam, and that is that point that the Iranians kicked into overdrive building these underground cities, both to protect their uranium processing, to build missiles, industrial facilities underground. Recognize they weren't going to have anything above ground that could be bombed and blown up. So now the final step was when this attack started, that they didn't do it during the 12-day war in June, but on February 28th, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard said, okay, we're closing the Strait of Hormuz. I don't know if the Iranians had done a study and conducted an estimate of what the economic impact of that would be. I'm inclined to believe no. I don't think they understood that this could hurt the oil market, but I don't think they had necessarily done a thorough analysis of how devastating this would be and how much control it would give them and leverage it would give them in negotiations going forward. The United States is now caught. There is no military way the United States can open the Strait of Hormuz. It doesn't exist. And I'll be happy to explain that, but I think we've talked about that before.
No, I mean, you don't need to tell me that twice, Larry. And I know the complications and logistics of trying to do just that. I think it's more. I just wanted to pick up on your point about the extent to which the IRGC and government would have been aware of the implications, or just. I think that's a good point. Actually, clearly they knew that they could deal damage. My emphasis was always from the beginning of this 4-day conflict, as Trump says.
It's been 4 months. These are like days on Mars, okay?
Yeah. No, they're just much longer days. Come on, mate. Where you been, right? We've just had Artemis 2 come back, right? It's just different time scale, right?
Yeah.
No, but in the duration of this conflict, it's been pretty clear that the Iranian strategy has been one of pressure points, finding asymmetrically important areas that they can leverage in a disproportionately powerful way. And obviously the Strait of Hormuz is the most important pressure point that they've been able to leverage. Mm-hmm. And to me, but that's not the same as them perhaps being able to foresee just the amount of damage it is doing to energy markets, global trade, because at the end of the day, this doesn't benefit Iran either. A blockade on their ports is still a problem, but equally so is their lack of ability to export certain energy as well. So it is still risky for them, but damn well worth the risk relative to the damage it puts on the American economy and interests and so on. So I guess from my curiosity on that point is, do you think that the Iranians can just do whatever they want over the Hormuz as long as they want, or do you think even they have to consider collateral damage?
Oh no, they'll be able to do whatever they want. The U.S. is grossly overestimating the effect of their blockade. As I think I said earlier, this is like my sixth interview today. So if I say something that I've already said, don't say, "Oh, let's hear. He's old. He's repeating it." Just say, "Hey, wait, you've already told me that. Let's move on." Okay.
Well, I'm sure we've got repeat views. You seem to have a very hardcore committed set of people who will literally come from every live stream just to listen to you, even if you say the same thing, which I think is very nice. It's great to have a loyal fan base.
I'm always flattered.
I enjoy what you've got to say. So, but no, go ahead. Tell me. I'm curious.
But if the United States Navy intercepts an Iranian ship, then the United States Navy has to attach a U.S. Navy ship to that captured vessel and stick with it until they get it to wherever they're taking it. The United States does not have enough ships to deal with 30 or 40 Iranian tankers. So in theory, they got this blockade, but in reality, they don't. It's I'll call it sort of a pseudo blockade. That they can capture one or two here or there, but they can't stop the whole thing. And if they think they're going to stop the whole flow of oil out of They're kidding themselves. It's just delusional. But, they sit around and, sort of like Adolf Hitler in his final month in his bunker there in Berlin, moving imaginary armies around on paper. They just, it doesn't exist. I think the one thing, if you're looking for a sign of, right now, the United States, and we talked about this, I think, a little bit yesterday, you've got the Joint Force Commander, Admiral Brad Cooper. He's overseeing this whole military operation with Iran. Under him, he's got 2 component commanders. So there's Combined Forces Aviation Component Commander, Air Force General, and Combined Forces Maritime Component Commander. That runs all the Navy stuff. What's missing there is you don't have a Combined Forces Ground Component Commander. Mm-hmm. And so until you get a ground component commander, you're never going to have any ground operations, because you're not going to let some Air Force general or some Navy admiral run a ground force operation. That's not what they do. They don't, they may know ranks, but they don't know the operations. More so than you wouldn't take an Army general and have him run an aircraft carrier. Good God. So we've got that. And what the Air Force commander is saying is, we've used up a critical amount of our precision missiles. And if we restart this war, we're going to deplete ourselves potentially within 2 or 3 weeks, that it will fall below a critical level, so that if in a month we get into a fight with China, we're going to lose. We're not going to have a single weapon to fire back with. So that's being taken into account now. From the military side of the house has come up saying, and the Navy guys saying to him, ditto. I agree with my Air Force buddy here. So I suspect Admiral Cooper is going, all right, guys, you make a good sentence. So that's the advice that he's given to General Kane. Kane at the Joint Chiefs of Staff, his job is to be the senior military advisor to the president. They're all telling the president this. The problem is Donald Trump is crazy. I mean, he is no longer the sane, rational man he may have been 5 years ago. He is emotional, and he doesn't remember from moment to moment necessarily the previous decisions he's made. So that text he sent out earlier today that I referenced, where he talked about the Iranians, they're collapsing. There are 2 ways to look at it. One way is he really believes that, and therefore is going to try to take the Strait of Hormuz and not lift the blockade. Or, and I'm hoping this is the case, he's finally come around to recognize, I don't have a way out of this. So let's use this as an excuse that, because the Iranians are in such chaos, we're going to help them settle this. We're going to drop the blockade, and then we're going to sit down and talk to them about opening the Strait of Hormuz, which is exactly what the Iranians want. So if it goes that route, then actually we may see a light at the end of the tunnel with respect to this war. But even if the war comes to an end tomorrow or extends into next week, the economic damage to the global economy is baked in. And we talked about this, I think, yesterday, using the metaphor of the tsunami. That, at the start, if you're sitting there on the beach at Phuket in Thailand, and all the water starts drawing out to sea, you're going, oh man, look at this, the beach. We've got a lot more beachfront here. No, that's the point. If you know anything about tsunamis, that's the point. You get your ass out of your beach chair and start running for the mountains. You want to get high ground. The last 7 weeks since the cutoff of the flow of oil, the flow of liquid natural gas, the flow of urea, the flow of helium, the flow of sulfuric acid out of the Persian Gulf, that was the ocean drawn back. Now today we're seeing the prices of oil is spiking up again, and that's going to continue. That is going to continue going up. It's time to run for the highlands, because the economic tsunami that's going to hit is going to be catastrophic, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, look, you very perfectly swung into, or helped me with my segue into, which was something about stockpiles, munition implications. So, just how much ammunition did the United States use, right? But according to some reports, the US has already depleted more than half, 50%, not 15, 50 of its pre-war munitions. So it drew heavily on its stocks of Tomahawks, Patriots, and other missiles in the first 39 days. So those first 39 days, right, mainly over March, were the intense air campaigns. So that could take anywhere from 1 to 4 years to replenish properly. And so that obviously leads to the situation about infantry's, well, if they weren't in a good position for dealing with, say, China in a hypothetical, they're definitely not good now, and puts the US in an incredibly high degree of vulnerability. What do you think, Larry?
Well, let me ask you. Yeah, so let me ask you a couple of questions. Are you a big math guy? Yeah, you're competent. What AI sort of tool do you use? ChatGPT, Claude, Grok, Perplexity?
I use multiple. Depends. I try to diversify, so I'm not too dependent on any one.
Okay,
but
well, just take one right now and type this question in. How many are rare earth minerals required to produce a PAC-3 interceptor for a Patriot missile battery?
So how many?
How many rare earth minerals
needed for
are needed to produce for the production of a PAC-3 missile for a Patriot missile battery?
Patriot missile battery. This is fun. It's like being in school. How many rare earth metals needed to produce? There's no publicly single information. It says the main rare earth metals include neodymium, samarium, dysprosium, terbium, and praseodymium.
Okay.
So 5 is what that says. But
yeah, and then if you ask the next question, who controls 90% of those?
Oh, well, I knew where that was going.
Yeah, and what's the answer? Yeah,
well,
the answer is
China, isn't it?
China. Yeah. And how are relations with China these days? Is Scott Bessent going out of his way to piss them off? Bet your ass he is.
Yeah.
And how are the Chinese saying, yeah, let's give the United States all these rare earth minerals so they can build these missiles that they're going to use against us? Ain't happening. So here's where we come in with the math. As of December 2025, December 31st, 2025, the United States since 2015 produced a maximum of 4,620 PAC-3 interceptors. Now, that's total. And that's derived because the information was published in the annual budgets that the Congress approved for DOD. Now, so since you have to use at least 2 of those interceptors against one inbound, either ballistic missile, cruise missile, or drone, you know right off the top with 4,620, and then they're producing 60 a month. So let's add in 180. So that gets us up to a total of 4,800. That means that 4,800 missiles are capable of intercepting 2,400 ballistic cruise missiles. Okay, you good with me on the math so far?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. So out that 4,800, at least 1,500 were sold to foreign countries like Australia, New Zealand, South Korea. So let's subtract from 4,800. We're now down to 3,300, correct?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So now our 3,300 missiles were capable of intercepting 1,550 missiles if fired. Well, we sent 1,000 of those PAC-3s to Ukraine between 2023 and 2025. So let's subtract You see where I'm going with this? We're now down to 2,300. Since 1,000 went off to Ukraine. So they started this, and then last June 12th, how many of those PAC-3 Patriots were fired? Because during that course, Iran fired over 1,500 missiles in that 12 days. That's more than 2,300, isn't it? If you have to use 2 for every one of those missiles. And then in this last 5 weeks, estimated that Iran fired over 4,000. So my point is that they're claiming that they've used up 50% of the PAC-3s. Nonsense. They've used up 95%. I guarantee it. The math simply does not work, because we know over the course of in Ukraine, Russia's fired 12,000 missiles, 12,000 plus missiles over the course of the last 4 years. So just take, how many, so they burned through all the Patriot supply up there. And then when you look at the number of Patriots that have been fired, the number of missiles that fired by Iran last summer, the 12-day war, and now this war, it exceeds the capability. So, like I said, there's still lying going on.
Yeah, it's always been the case that the Chinese have a incredible control over some of the biggest and most important components of anything, of materials in any way, shape, or form. And the old adage is in this war is simply that China doesn't have to do anything, and they benefit hugely from Donald Trump. It's like when you're cycling on a bike and you put a stick in your own wheel, and then you flip over forward and you're like, no, I'm injured. Yeah, well, you kind of did that yourself, you plum. I think it's the same analogy with Brexit, to be honest. The UK shot itself in the foot by with that result. But yeah, I do wonder what this means for the confidence of the PLA, of the CCP in their interests over to Taiwan. I'm not going to make a prediction over whether a war is likely or they're going to actually invade the island, but simply
I guarantee you they will not invade. They don't need to now.
No, they don't. No, that's a good point. No, they don't need to.
They're sitting back. They're watching this much like the same way the Iranians watched the United States invade Iraq in 2003. The Iranians are going, so here's been our arch enemy, Saddam Hussein, and the Americans are taking him out. Hey, get the popcorn. We're just going to watch and enjoy this, because now they're going to replace him with all of our guys. Hey, is God great or what? And now here's the Chinese. They're watching the United States deplete its global military arsenal of precision weapons by attacking, basically breaking itself in trying to defeat Iran and being unable to defeat Iran. All the Chinese got to do is say, hey, let's support our friends there. Remember, the Chinese and Russians signed a trilateral security agreement with Iran on January 29th of this year. So they're invested. And now, I was just going to say, and now they've got the benefit that Iran is fighting for them and damaging the United States in a significant way that it means China won't have to fight.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Chinese have been, what they've done with the Spratly Islands, what they've done with the developments of some of these bases, the defense pacts, like with the Solomon Islands. I mean, we touched upon it yesterday briefly, didn't we? I mean, the Chinese have grossly increased their defense spending, and they have the largest navy in the world. Now, biggest doesn't necessarily equate to effectiveness, but the point being is that the Chinese are not the force that they were 20 years ago. And I think that there seems to be a little bit of a underestimation of what they're capable of. And especially in this regard, because of how much the Americans have expended their munition stockpiles, including some of their most critical ones like the Tomahawks, that's a huge setback. So even if the Chinese do intend to do over something with Taiwan, which I'm not sure still, as you say, they're not in a good position anymore. And also because what Trump's been doing, he's been taking a flamethrower to Japan's relations, South Korean relations. I mean, the Americans were pulling out some critical assets from South Korea to redeploy them to the Middle East only, what, 3 weeks ago.
Right.
And now suddenly, like, oh, we're done now. So what the hell was the point in this redeployment? How much money, time, energy, and resources does it require to literally refocus such significant military assets all the way in East Asia, which is where apparently the pivot to Asia was happening in 2009 when Obama first announced it. And now Trump's like, no, let's put it back in the Middle East. And then 5 minutes later, oh, we're done now. The guy has the strategical vision of a sort of pumpkin. I mean, he looks about as much as one with his face.
Well,
sorry, I went on a side
I was just going to say he has no strategic vision, and there is no strategic vision on the part of anybody in the United States that's in leadership position. So it is. We've tried to get away with just using massive force and now bullying to stay on top of things, and it's not working. We have actually, it's a self-inflicted wound, because here's China that has now become the world's preeminent industrial power. There's no doubt about that, and they're making tremendous advances. We used to claim, oh, they're just stealing stuff from us. We're so smart. They have to steal it from us. They're making stuff now that we can't make, such as hypersonic missiles. Russia and China both have made hypersonic missiles. United States has not. I'm acquainted with one of the men who's in charge of that project, and he's been talking about the U.S. being able to produce one for 3 years and still haven't been able to pull it off.
Well, I remember being in Washington when the news first came out that the DoD basically just admitted, yeah, we don't have the capacity to develop this kind of technology at the moment. That was 3.5 years ago. November 2022. I remember the day quite vividly, because then I myself had a rather awkward conversation with a friend of mine from the department over dinner that night. It's quite. I think the American government is very good at projecting a show of force, but as you said earlier, in a very sort of loud mouth way. But sometimes when you look at the nuances of operational capacity or coherency, especially like between the military and the political, it's really not quite, because that's the one thing that China does benefit from. It's quite centralized, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of continuation between ideology and thought thinking from the political party to the military arms. Whilst now we've got the government completely dysfunctional, and therefore the military doesn't know what to do. So I mean, I still wonder whether we're going to go back to war with Iran over something.
I think we'll really know this week, by the end of the week. I think this week's going to be consequential on several fronts, both with respect to Iran and with respect to Russia and Ukraine. The United States has all these assets locked and loaded. They brought in, I think we talked yesterday, the 4th aircraft carrier. I don't know if that's to replace the Gerald Ford or not, the Dwight Eisenhower aircraft carrier. But, we saw this pilgrimage, and we talked about it a little bit yesterday, that Arachi made from, he went to Pakistan, gave the Pakistanis, some, here, give this to the Americans, tell them this is our new position, which a hardening a position. They basically said, hey, we're not going to talk nukes anymore. That's off the table. We're signatories to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We're gonna be treated like any other country that signed the NPT, and you don't get the bosses around anymore. Then he went and talked to Arachi went to Oman, talked to them about how they're going to manage the Strait of Hormuz, how they're going to divide up the money they're both going to make. Then he went back to Pakistan to get the answer. So what did the Americans say? And so, armed now with the latest information, flew up to St. Petersburg Sunday night, met yesterday with Vladimir Putin, a very warm meeting. You had Yuri Ushakov there, along with Lavrov, and along with the head of military intelligence. So, Putin rolled out the red carpet for Arachi. And Iraqi was, as I pointed out earlier, he's part of Five Guys. They all fought against Turkey. Against Iraq in the Iran-Iraq War. They were all members of the IRGC. So there's no division among them, despite Trump's claim to the contrary. It's the absolute opposite. Iran's probably got the most united government now that it's ever had in its 46, 47-year history. So we'll see. Iran is armed and ready. They've given the United States the exit plan. Lift the blockade, then we'll sit down and we'll talk about the Strait of Hormuz, getting it back open in a way that it will not cripple the world economy. The one thing that Iran's not going to negotiate on is no ships servicing Israel are going to come out of here. Israel's going to have to go elsewhere.
Well, we had that Russian super yacht going through this morning.
Mm-hmm.
That was entertaining.
Yeah.
Sure, the blockade's really working, guys. That was funny. I also know the people who owned that yacht, so it was quite entertaining actually. But you've given quite a lot of descriptors there of what could happen, but what do you think should happen? Like, what's your preference to happen versus what you think will most likely happen?
I think this is going to drag on for a while until the economic pain in the West is going to have to reach a level that they recognize they're going to have to negotiate a deal with Iran, because they can't, if there was actually a viable military option that would have a 70% chance of success being defined as you force Iran to surrender, then I would say, the United States will really, they'll stick it out till that point, but they don't have that option at all. The odds are exactly reversed. The United States doesn't have a viable military option to succeed against Iran. And so it's going to have to, at some point, make some very uncomfortable concessions, and ones that'll be, politically indefensible as far as Israel is concerned. But at that point, the United States, may ultimately tell Israel to go pound sand. We've done it in the past. It's just that Trump is such a control, so much under the control of the Zionists, that it's very difficult for him to break free. But the way his popularity is cratering in the United States, he's down to like 33% approval. Once that drops below 30%, then the alarm bells are really going to go off in the White House. And they'll no longer be able to say, "Oh, it's okay. This is just a minor glitch." No, it's not. This is permanent. This is major, and he's going to have to do something to try to stop the bleeding. And it's probably already too late.
Oh, I think it's too late.
Yeah.
How can he? It's too late. Well, okay. What is it? It's May on Friday. The midterms are what, November? So that's exactly 6 months. So,
yeah.
A lot can change in 6 hours, to be fair, but I find it hard for people to because the energy point, I think the very last thing I'd be interested in from you, Larry, is simply just like on the energy front. Like, this is going to last for such a long time.
Yeah. It's a time distance issue. The oil tankers travel about 10 kilometers or 10 nautical miles per hour per hour. And so it's a relatively slow pace. And so once they get loaded up with oil, then they pull out of the Persian Gulf, and then they start their journey to wherever. It takes in some cases it can take 3 weeks, in other cases 6 weeks. And then, so whatever was loaded up prior to February 28th and got out, that has been received at ports around the world now. But that means there are no new ships coming to replenish that. So there now is that gap. And so like if we stop the war tomorrow, you're still looking at another 6 weeks with losing 20% of the world's supply of oil and natural gas and urea and helium and sulfuric acid. So the longer this goes on, the greater the economic impact on the world is. This has put Iran in a strong position. They countries will come and plead, hey, can we get some oil? And so there will be certain countries that will get oil. They'll get their shipments because of their relationship with Iran. And they'll be paying for that, not with US dollars, but they're asking to pay for it now in Iranian currency. So the demand for the Iran's currency is going to go up. And then they've also been working with China, where China gets paid. Some of this oil will be paid for in yuan. So this is, Iran's got no incentive right now to lift this siege. They're going to use the Strait of Hormuz to their benefit, to their advantage, until such time that it no longer serves that purpose.
Yeah, absolute insanity. I think, the Israelis continue to violate the ceasefire. Hezbollah continue to strike back. It's as I said to you in many of our conversations, Lebanon is the country that I worry about the most. Iran is. I've spoken to some Iranian people I know on the ground, and they since had a few revelations or reconsiderations about them wanting war. And wishing they'd never supported it. If anything, this has really galvanized the Iranian people against the Trump administration or America more broadly in a way that it wasn't in the past, right? They were more anti the government or fed up with the government and wanted the US to get involved. And now it's completely, whilst they're not maybe fully embracing the government, they are definitely not supportive of America in the same way anymore.
Do you know who John Kiriakou is? John Kiriakou is retired. He was a CIA officer. He was one that went to prison for allegedly because he exposed the torture program, and he got punished for being a whistleblower. But he was talking to Tucker Carlson last night, and he described that after the bombing, after the attack on Iran, one night there was a video showed up of this. Let's call her a large woman who would be, if you will, the poster girl for a lesbian magazine. She was large, manly, and what was she doing? She was out waving the flag in support of the Ayatollah. Guarantee you that before those attacks on February 28th, she would have been one of the ones protesting against the Islamic government. And here she was out protesting in support of the Islamic government. And I'm just reinforcing the point you were just making, that this has not turned out. The United States thought, oh, we're gonna hit them and all these protesters will rise up to overthrow the government. Nope, worked out the exact opposite.
Yeah, not only has it not sort of diminished support just overall, it's actually reinforced it in completely the other way. It's had a net negative impact, which is just so stupid and essentially reflective of Donald Trump. But Larry, it's been an absolute pleasure as always. I really love our chats. It's been great speaking with you all this time. Obviously, I hope we can do it again in the next few days. Maybe
let me leave you with one thing to think about.
Another story, maybe.
Well, yeah, Peskov yesterday in Russia. Did you hear what he announced? He gave, for the first time since the start of the special military operation, the Russians have given a deadline to Ukraine. They said, get your forces out of the Donbass by May 1st or else. So Friday is going to be an interesting day. I don't think the Russians make idle threats. So we're going to see what this means. So keep that keep your eyes out. And leave that as a teaser for our next conversation.
Maybe, yeah. I'm not so sure about that, but maybe we can debate that at the time. But thank you very much, Larry, and everyone else very much for watching. Let you go. Be on your way. I'm just going to stay on for a minute to debrief.
Yeah, send me the link when you get done. I'll post it at sonar21.com.
Amazing, Larry. Thank you so much. But everyone, thank you,
All right,
Larry.
Peter. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. But that was it, everyone. That was Larry Johnson, who we had on yesterday. I'm just going to debrief for a few minutes here, as I did yesterday. Don't worry, it won't be another 45 minutes of me wittering on about everything under the sun. But yeah, some of you are going to log off, I know, because you're going to go and watch Larry's next engagement. But before you do that, do subscribe to the channel, because we're going to have Larry back. We've sort of been chatting offline. and we're going to try and make it like a weekend sort of thing where me and him can get together and have a chat about proceedings, be it about Ukraine and Russia, where I think we're going to disagree more, if I'm honest, or the war in Iran, or maybe China, or Trump's foreign policy, and yeah. I think I think Larry's got some very interesting experiences. I was very interested to hear his historical analysis about Iraq and Iran and Saddam Hussein. I mean, Saddam Hussein is among the worst of the kinds of people that you can imagine. But he was, he felt betrayed or whatever, spied on, double crossed by the Americans and the Israelis. And I think that's pretty clear that that's what led to the developments of the 90s and then of course 2003. So the situation now with what the Iranians feel themselves in, they're back up against the wall, their survival at stake, all these sorts of sentiments are very reflective of a country that is fighting for its existential survival, right? The Israelis talk about this a lot, that they feel that they're on the receiving end, that they are fighting for their survival. But in this case, the Iranians are going up against the much more powerful country. Of course, the United States is more powerful if you're in a conventional military setting, but we're not in a conventional military setting. And that's why the Iranians are so good at leveraging their relative strengths or comparative advantages to hold out, to if you want to use the word beat the Americans, but simply to outlast them, right? The goal is who can outrightly win or who can outlast. Those are the two framings. And it's pretty clear that the global consensus overall is that the Americans have not won this. Have they caused significant damage and setbacks to the Iranians, with their economic development, with their infrastructure? Yes, but as we both just agreed on at the end there with Larry, the Americans they've done the opposite by getting more Iranian people to feel anti-American intervention, right? There was a lot of support for Americans coming in, or a lot of Iranians after the protests and how the Islamic Republic treated its own people in early January. There was a lot of support for America to come in and deal a decisive blow, but no one, I think, unfortunately, naively understood what that actually meant in the case of Iran's operations against Iran. And so, and particularly in the case of Israel, it was clear that they were just trying to do as much damage as possible, not really restrained to certain sites or specific targets. It was just about weakening the Iranian state as a collective whole as much as possible, because the ultra-nationalist government in Israel, which I greatly despise, specifically the government, they just wanted to capitalize on that. And because now the Americans and the Iranians have not been at war as much, kinetic war, the Israelis have been trying to up the ante where they can, and so they've turned their attention to their near abroad with with Hezbollah, Lebanon, and so on. So yeah, I think this is going to go on for a long time. There was an interesting article in the Financial Times earlier by their US correspondent or editor, Edward Luce, and he was basically talking about that, the Iranians have no incentive to end this, but also they just benefit from it. The longer this goes on, the more it bleeds the Americans for their reputation, it bleeds them for financial, economic. America's okay in the sort of, they've got their own energy security, but it's not only about that. It's about what you import as a country. There are products like fertilizer and other things which require more natural commodities to be produced. And therefore, that will down the line affect the American people as well. I mean, I was in New York the past 2 weeks, as I told some of you yesterday, and some of the pricings, some of the price hikes that I've seen, the new price levels relative to what they were a couple of weeks before, according to some friends, were insane. So I think that's pretty nuts. that's happened. Also, yeah, I was going to do a video tomorrow on the UAE leaving, but I think that the OPEC element is quite a big deal, to be honest. I know Larry said it didn't particularly matter. I'm just going to be honest. I disagree with him on the idea that sort of UAE is going to be dissolved or somehow absorbed into the US, into sort of a nothing state. Like UAE's lost a lot of business, but it's not suddenly nothing. It's still a very wealthy country, and the government has been taking steps to try to sort of diversify off energy production. But it is a big deal for them to be leaving the OPEC. An interesting fact that a lot of Emiratis don't even know, a lot of people don't know, is the Emiratis were actually members of OPEC before the UAE became a country. The country itself is only 55 years old, in 1971. And so while OPEC production is dominated by Saudi Arabia, the UAE had the second highest spare production capacity. What that means, in other words, is that it was the second most important swing producer. So it can increase production to ease prices at short notice. And so it's these long-term, I think, reconsiderations. I think that the UAE wanted to use the considerable capacity it had invested in, and it got tired sort of the limitations. OPEC basically limits production to about 3.5 million barrels a day, 3.5 million barrels a day. So OPEC membership sacrifices in terms of lost revenue, therefore were much higher for the UAE, because they're not the size of Saudi Arabia, right, as a population or economic output necessarily. And so while Saudi Arabia can sort of take the lost revenue, UAE can't, especially now with the loss of, or because of the impact of the war. I think that's one of the biggest considerations here. I guess you could say that it's also a reflection of the coherence of sort of organizations like this. You know, there's a lot of emphasis on NATO or the UN, and sort of alternative media likes to talk about the destruction of Western institutions, but the Western institutions are non-Western institutions are seeing a problem as much as anyone else. BRICS, where's BRICS? It's not exactly doing much right now. I mean, Iran's in it. Saudi Arabia is an observer state. That's not going great. And now we've got OPEC, right? What this does at this time is deal a decisive blow or raise big questions about the coherency of this bloc, because it's not just the UAE. It's about the other countries and what they're planning to do. You know, if Saudi Arabia feels particularly threatened or antagonized by this, they might respond with an oil price war that the UAE's economy might be able to deal with, but other OPEC members can't. OPEC plus Russia, right? Of course, Russia's been benefiting from a lot of money and disproportionate wins in the case of the Iran war. So I think that the situation with the OPEC withdrawal is quite a big deal. And of course, what it means for of sort of like the relevancy, the relationship of countries to oil. It might encourage more countries to seek alternative forms of energy even faster, right? China's been doing this by sort of investing in electrification. I was reading an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal, I think it was, and it was talking about China's investments into into renewables, right? We were talking about the rare earth metals with Larry earlier in the conversation, but China's also it's one of the kings of solar energy and other renewable forms. So I think that UAE's exit could spark further dominoes, right? And whether there are growing pressures on Saudi Arabia. This is the beginning of the complications now, not the end of it. this is the first domino to fall, and therefore what it means for oil production. The Qataris have obviously cut off all their gas production. So there's a lot there that I think is going to escalate. We're going to see a significant amount of escalation and problems. So yeah, I'm going to look in more. I'm not a pure energy expert. There is one guest who I've had on, Anas Abhaji, I think Abhaji, who we've had on before, who I would like to host again, given he's also an expert on oil. So I think it's going to be a major deal for a lot of the countries there. But I do think that what's interesting also is just the broader balance of power. I had this in a conversation with Shrita Parsi earlier today. We've had him on the show quite a few times if you're new here. But essentially, ironically, in January, we'd had a conversation about the shift in the balance of power that's happening around the Middle East. And one of the things that we had noted at the time is the growing sort of dual sort of balance of the growing competition between two blocks. So on one hand, you've got UAE. Sorry, let me start again. You've got Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Turkey. And then on the other hand, you've got UAE, Israel, and by extension, to a degree, although it's not strictly in the Middle East, India. Now, one can ask where Qatar fits in all of that. But essentially speaking, you've got a growing race of two blocks of nations trying to outcompete one another for the overall influence of the region, to counterbalance against one another. Obviously, a lot of people look towards Israel as the most powerful country because of military potency and support by the United States. Others put, Saudi Arabia in that bracket. And obviously, previously to the past 2-3 years, Iran was the major player for regional hegemony. But I think that can be largely understood that, while not to be ignored, Iran is not the same powerhouse it was a few years ago, or a few weeks ago, a few months ago. So what I think is very interesting is to see how the balance of power across the broader Middle East is shifting. Some people include Egypt in this other block: Pakistan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt as the sort of four interlocutors, the four countries trying to sort of direct peace talks, with Pakistan obviously leading the way. But yeah, certainly there's a big shift in the balance of power. I've posted in the chat, wherever my chat has gone. My computer's reached its time limit for the night. Apparently, what time is it? Oh, it's midnight. Okay. But yeah, I posted the link for that video, the latest episode with Shrita Parsi, in the description, in the comments. So do watch that after this to understand what me and Shrita were talking about. But essentially, yeah, I think that there's a growing race for overall sort of regional dominance and sort of these competing mini alliances, if you like. Some people have even talked about an Islamic NATO, a Muslim NATO developing, which I think is slightly daft. But yeah, I think I'll end, guys, with simply just saying, look, the coverage of the war, I find has largely wrapped up on a daily basis or on an urgency basis. Colleagues on YouTube, some of you who may know me from other channels, are not doing as longer streams anymore, or they're not doing as many streams or as long or as many coverage. And I also see that sort of the live updates on the BBC News or Al Jazeera or any major news website, they've stopped doing their rolling coverage, which means that there's just a sense of normalization here, that we're just sort of settling for a long one, right? That the situation is unresolvable right now. We're just the world is just going to live with this lingering perpetual state of conflict, permanent state of conflict in the Strait of Hormuz, in the broader Middle East, and sort of a bit like we've gotten used to the war in Ukraine. It's just sort of another normal element of the new world that we all just are getting on with our lives day to day. And in the background, there's a continued set of political discussions about, should we sign a peace deal? Should we sign a ceasefire? Should we open the Strait of Hormuz? The day that the Strait of Hormuz actually officially opens will be a big one. But right now, it's like if you've got a cup full, but there's a tiny little hole in it, and so it's just drip feeding a tiny bit of water out of the cup. I'm using an analogy from Two and a Half Men. If any of you know that analogy, it's about Charlie Sheen's expenditures versus income. So right now the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and so the water is very small. The drip is very small because ships are going through, but on a minimal capacity. Versus if it was just fully broken and open, then you'd be having 100+ ships a day. So, yeah, it's just going to be, I think, a part of our new normal for the foreseeable future. I'm not saying for the rest of time, but I think for a good few months now. I didn't think that this war was going to last for months, and I don't think this war in its same capacity is lasting for months. But more specifically, it is going to be lingering on in the background. It's going to be there, and we're just going to sort of have to acclimatize our daily expenses, the cost of living, food, energy, all that, travel, especially with the summer. I think what will be a big factor is also the summer, when we start seeing people wanting to fly, Americans wanting to fly all the way to Europe, Europeans wanting to fly around. The cost of air travel is insane now. Flying back from the United States, some of the prices I saw for tickets on Sunday were incredible. So I think this is going to last for a while, but I don't think much is going to happen yet. But what I will say, everyone, is thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, then do give the stream a like, do give it a thumbs up. Drop any questions or thoughts you'd like to see of guests in the comments. We've got 2 big guests coming on in the next 10 days. We've got General Wesley Clark of NATO. He was the former Supreme NATO commander during the Kosovo Wars, so from 1997 to 2001. And whilst it's not I'm not interviewing him because I support everything about NATO or his perspective, perhaps, but he is an important person to listen to. So I think it's going to be interesting to have him on. So if you're interested to listen to that, and even if you're not, you should, because it's worth actually challenging your opinion. I'm seeing Danaron, no thanks. Well, stay in your bubble if you want, but I don't think that's a healthy way to live. It's also an incredibly boring way to live. And then after him, we've got General Mick Ryan, who's a well-known Australian general and is equally quite important for. These are Western-orientated perspectives here, but the channel is. Well, I mean, listen to my accent, right? I'm half English, half Russian, so I try to be balanced in bringing on both those perspectives. But yeah, I mean, I'm going to those in the bubble who listen to Western media. I mean, if you listen to non-Western media, or if you only listen to Larry, or only listen to Scott Ritter, or only listen to Douglas McGregor, that's also being in a bubble. So yeah, it's we all stay in our own bubbles because we think it takes actually a lot to be critically analytical, or also of yourself. I myself didn't realize how much I was biased to the Western narratives until I started interviewing more people like Larry, which is why I have him on as much as I do. So that's not true, Darren. Westerners do not only listen to Western perspectives. Not gonna lie, how Russophobic? Yeah, that's just bollocks. I'm not Russophobic. I'm very fond of my heritage and proud to be from Russia. And the country's beautiful. The architecture, the cultural elements are insane. And I think anyone who can't admit that is weird. But it's incorrect to say that sort of Putin hasn't done terrible things as well. So I think there's we sort of pick and choose what suits our preferences and narratives, I think. But anyway, everyone, if you actually want to challenge yourself, then do subscribe and give the video a like, and listen to some alternative perspectives, not just ones that you already like, telling you things that you already know, because that is a waste of time. You might as well just doom scroll on TikTok or Instagram. But anyway, guys, we'll see you all soon. Have a good evening. Have a good afternoon. Have a good morning. Take care. This is the Global Gambit. I've been Piotr. Take care.